It began, as many disasters do, inside something ordinary, a small, useful feature on a platform billions rely on. Facebook's View As was a privacy tool, a way for users to preview how their profiles appeared to others. Simple, transparent, designed to reassure. But late in the summer of 2018, that harmless tool turned into a vulnerability no one had anticipated. An attacker, or perhaps several, uncovered a chain of logic flaws buried deep in the code that powered View As. Those flaws, linked together with precision, pried open a pathway into Facebook's core. And once that pathway was exposed, the attackers didn't need passwords. They didn't need emails. They needed only one thing: access tokens, the silent digital credentials that keep millions of people logged in every day. Facebook engineers first noticed the anomaly as an unusual spike in activity on their internal monitoring systems in mid-September 2018. They traced the strange behavior and, by September 25th, had determined they were looking at an active attack. Within days, the company shut down the vulnerable feature and began an emergency response. 3 days after discovery, Facebook publicly disclosed the incident. The company's initial estimate said almost 50 million user accounts were exposed. As the investigation continued, the number was refined, and the meaning of exposure was explained in far clearer detail. To understand why this mattered, we have to understand the token. Access tokens are not passwords. They are session credentials, cryptographic artifacts that let a user stay logged in without typing a password every time. Lose a password, and you change it. Lose an access token, and anyone holding it can, for a period, act as the user. In this breach, the attackers found a way to harvest those tokens. And with tokens in hand, they could impersonate accounts, view profile information, and, crucially, traverse the platform from one account to another automatically. That automatic traversal multiplied the attacker's reach many times over. Facebook's post-mortem described the technical vector as a chain of 3 bugs interacting inside the View As logic. In plain terms, a user interface component that should have been hidden appeared in the View As mode. The code behind that component generated tokens for the account being viewed rather than the viewer. And finally, the tokens were exposed in the page output where an automated program could extract them. Each bug alone was a problem. Together, they were catastrophic. What happened next was rapid and systematic. The attackers began from a set of seed accounts they controlled. Using an automated process, their code clicked through friends and friends of friends, invoking the same View As lookups that normal users might perform, and harvested tokens along the way. That automated crawling produced a cascade. Tokens for millions of accounts were harvested in hours. Facebook's initial emergency accounting estimated nearly 50 million tokens affected. Later analysis revised the number of accounts with tokens actually stolen to about 30 million. As a precaution, Facebook reset tokens for an additional 40 million accounts that had used View As in the past year, forcing roughly 90 million people to re-log in while engineers scrambled to patch and secure the platform. The scope of what the attackers could see varied. For roughly 15 million accounts, the attackers accessed basic contact details, names, emails, phone numbers depending on what users had shared. For about 14 million more, the intruders were able to pull a broader range of profile information: gender, language, relationship status, hometown, birth date, device types used to access Facebook, education, workplace, recent locations, the pages someone follows, and more. For approximately 1 million accounts, no personal data appears to have been accessed. The token itself was taken, but nothing in the profile was read. Facebook also said message content was generally not exposed, with a narrow exception for certain page admins where messages to the page were viewable. Because Facebook's access tokens can also be used for third-party services that rely on Facebook login, the theoretical risk extended beyond Facebook's own walls. If a stolen token were used against a third-party app, an attacker could potentially access external accounts, things like dating apps, marketplace profiles, or services that people use with their Facebook identity. In the days after the disclosure, Facebook and outside researchers rushed to verify whether those tokens had been used to access third-party apps. Facebook later said that their investigation found no evidence that apps were accessed using the stolen tokens. A relief, but also a reminder of the fragility inherent in single sign-on systems. The immediate human effect was real. Users found themselves forcibly logged out of their accounts. Some were inconvenienced. Others panicked, worried their accounts had been hijacked. For an instant, millions of people experienced a sudden loss of access to a part of their digital life. For people who used Facebook to manage business pages, to run customer communications, or even to control integrations with other services, the disruption posed real operational headaches. Engineers at Facebook spent long days and nights tracing logs, patching the code, invalidating tokens, and coordinating with law enforcement. The FBI opened an investigation, and Facebook said it was cooperating. There is an operational lesson here that engineers have repeated ever since. Small features designed for convenience, to let users preview, to smooth the experience, often interact with complex stacks of authentication and authorization code. Those interactions are fertile ground for logic errors. The View, as flaw, was not an exotic, never-seen vulnerability. It was a logic path, a UI rendering that enabled back-end code to behave differently than expected. And that kind of mistake can be hard to catch in routine testing, because test cases often assume normal operation, not unusual UI states triggering back-end token generation. Facebook's public timeline of their response is instructive. On September 25th, they identified the incident. By September 27th to 28th, they had taken View as offline, reset tokens for affected users, and begun notifying the people they believed were impacted. In the weeks that followed, Facebook provided more detailed disclosures, explaining how the attack worked, who might be affected, and the nature of the data accessed. They also cooperated with the FBI and other authorities seeking to identify the perpetrators. But technical fixes alone do not erase the reputational damage. Facebook had, only months earlier, seen public scrutiny over its handling of user data. This incident fed a narrative about platform risk and the company's capacity to protect data at scale. Regulators took notice. In Europe, where Facebook's regional operations are managed from Ireland, data protection authorities opened inquiries. Ultimately, those inquiries matured into enforcement. And in December 2024, the Irish Data Protection Commission issued a fine against Meta of €251 million related to the 2018 breach. That penalty underscored that regulatory consequences can arrive years after an incident, and that companies must treat security and disclosure as continuous obligations. Legal and regulatory follow-ups included audits, inquiries, and class action suits. U.S. courts allowed certain claims to move forward on behalf of users whose data may have been compromised. Lawmakers and privacy advocates used the episode to press for better corporate transparency and stronger safeguards around single sign-on and session management. The breach is frequently cited in policy debates about how platforms should be required to notify users and regulators, quickly and transparently, when large data exposures occur. There is also a broader technical lesson about the concentration of risk. Platforms like Facebook provide enormous convenience. One password, one identity, single sign-on across many apps. But that convenience concentrates trust. When a platform's session management is compromised, the blast radius can be huge. Security researchers have long warned that single points of identity, when broken, create cascading failures. The 2018 View as incident made that abstract risk concrete. So what did Facebook change? In the immediate wake of the incident, the company disabled the View as feature, while engineers rewrote the relevant code paths and patched the logic bugs. They invalidated tokens, deployed mitigations, and moved to strengthen internal controls around code review and access management. Over time, Facebook, like many large platforms after a major incident, expanded its defenses around token issuance, code testing, logging, and anomaly detection. It is reasonable to assume those changes have reduced the chance of a similar exploit reappearing in the exact form it did in 2018. But technical recovery is one part of the story. The incident exposed an existential question about trust. Users are asked to give platforms their most personal data: relationships, locations, searches, messages. When a breach exposes that information, the relationship between user and platform is fundamentally altered. Trust is not a feature you can switch back on with a patch. Rebuilding it requires transparency, accountability, and ongoing proof that the platform values user safety over convenience or optics. Looking beyond Facebook, the story also changed how other companies treat social login and token scopes. Several services reevaluated how much they depend on Facebook login, asking whether the convenience justified the risk. Security teams across industries began to treat session tokens with the same caution once reserved for passwords and API keys. Rotate them, scope them tightly, monitor their use, and assume that any token can be compromised. There's a second lesson about incident disclosure and the moral obligation to notify. Speed matters. Public trust is fragile, and secrecy, even if motivated by a desire to avoid panic, can make outcomes worse. Regulators increasingly take disclosure into account when assessing penalties. Handling incidents with promptness and clarity can reduce long-term regulatory risk. It's tempting at the end of such a story to point fingers and to seek a single scapegoat. But real security failures are usually systemic. They are the product of design trade-offs, legacy code, pressure to ship features quickly, and the human realities of vast engineering organizations. Denying that complexity is to miss the point. The better response, and the one the security community advocates, is to build systems that assume mistakes will happen and to design for containment, least privilege, robust testing, compartmentalization, and rapid, truthful incident response. Finally, there is the geopolitical and societal layer. Big platforms do not operate in a vacuum. They are targets for criminals, and potentially for nation-state actors, because the data they hold is valuable. That makes platform security a matter not only of corporate policy, but of public interest. Citizens, consumers, and policymakers now share a stake in how these systems are governed. The View, as breach, helped crystallize that debate. If you want to know how likely it is that a similar incident could happen again, the honest answer is, we can never say never. Software is written by humans, and the interactions between features can create blind spots. But the industry is learning. Engineers took The View as lessons to heart, rethinking session lifetimes, limiting token scopes, expanding automated test suites, investing in deeper monitoring, and building faster, more transparent incident playbooks. Those changes lower the odds, but they cannot eliminate risk. So what should you, as a user, take away from all of this? First, treat single sign-on as a convenience that comes with trade-offs. Where possible, use two-factor authentication on accounts that support it, and limit which services you connect to a primary social login. Second, keep an eye on account activity, and be skeptical of unusual login prompts or forced logout messages. Third, demand better from platforms. Insist on clear disclosure and better protection. The technical fixes will matter most when paired with public accountability. The Facebook View, as breach of 2018, is a story about code, yes. But more importantly, it is a story about trust, design choices, and the social contract between companies and the people who use their products. A UI feature intended to help users see themselves from another perspective became, for a time, a tool that allowed outsiders to impersonate millions of people. That inversion, from transparency to exposure, from convenience to compromise, is the lesson this story leaves us with. We will continue to watch how platforms adapt and how regulators respond. Incidents like this are painful, but they are also catalysts. They force companies to change. They force policymakers to act. And, if we are wise, they force each of us to think about our digital lives with a little more caution. Because when something as small as an interface quirk can lead to tens of millions of compromised identities, the problem is not only technical, it is human.